I think all of this comes down to the huge philosophical question overwhelming this whole conversation is if our perceptions are biased, if we're limited to five senses, and even those five senses, even that each individual one is limited compared to other animals on the planet, and insects even, which are so small compared to us, yet they still can perceive more than we can in some ways, and we can perceive more than they can in other ways. So what does that mean about reality? Because we depend on our five senses to perceive reality. So if our five senses are limited, the philosophical question is, does that mean our perceptions of reality are biased?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Out of the Box podcast. This is we are your host, Steve Adcock and Jose Tapia, and today we are going to be talking about the self and how we have limitations within our senses that cause our perception to be biased to what we are able to perceive. So, without further ado, Steele, this was something that you had thought about. So, tell us a little bit about your initial thoughts on what you think are some limitations within the human experience.
All right, I like how it's phrased. Yeah, five senses, as we say. The sense of sight, the sense of hearing, the sense of taste, the sense of touch. So it's a question of we only have five senses to understand and perceive the world, and we're limited to those five senses. So it's like, what does that really mean about reality? I guess we talked a lot about reality before, but like, what does the five senses specifically mean? And then if you even dive into each of the five senses, like vision, for example, our vision becomes more limited at night. So we can only see a certain amount of things at night. Sometimes our mind is more likely to play tricks on us at night. Um, you can't perceive as much color at night because the parts in the eyes that perceive the light waves that go into our eyes at night are just not as powerful as the ones during the day. So
Mm-hmm.
even vision, and then, like, if you compare our species as human beings to other species on the planet, other species can see because there's the light spectrum and it's limited, of our vision. But other animals can see past the light spectrum, like in ultraviolet light. I think some insects, like bees, right, can see and more into the ultraviolet light. So it's like that's interesting. And dogs can
Yeah.
hear better than we can hear.
Or
So
smell.
yeah, smell better than we can smell.
Also, snakes have, um, I think they can read thermal, like the body changes in heat. Like they can actually perceive thermal energy, and that's
Oh,
how they know like if it's a human or a living thing.
I actually didn't know that.
So it's pretty
Well,
interesting.
and like even bats, there was like a philosopher talked about how do bats perceive reality when they're echoing and bouncing sounds off of
Mm.
objects to perceive them. And it was
Mm-hmm.
about consciousness and stuff like that, about what that means about consciousness. Like, what does it mean to be a bat? In that sense.
Mm-hmm. It was it's pretty cool that you mentioned that because I was watching a video about this kid who he was born blind, but he developed almost like an eco sensor or something like that, where he could ride a bike, he could do normal things like anybody else would, but he would do it through the sound. So his sound abilities actually developed much more than normal people. And so whenever, for example, they did this exam where they put a piece of like let's say a pencil in the table, and then they hit the table, and he had to uh like say where it was exactly that the object was placed. And it was really interesting because he like almost like 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 he would guess it right, which kind of goes to show that sometimes we might rely or balance out our our abilities or our senses that we have available when we are born, and some of them grow more than others depending on our inclinations that we have, right? Like for example, this kid didn't have vision, and so he relied on sound heavily to really know where he was walking, where he was going, and so he really used sound to know where he was at, which is interesting because it was almost like you're saying, like a bat, right? And how does he develop his sense of consciousness,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. Yeah, it's really interesting how like the other senses overcompensate for the other one that's missing when that happens. Even someone like oh man, Helen
Even
Keller.
autistic people develop a really high sense of like musical abilities, right?
Right.
And so they're able to perceive sound and at a different level, I guess.
Yeah, with
So,
autism, yeah, what you're talking about, like, is there's some theories that say they're over the stimuli. They have a hard time filtering it, because naturally as human beings, and that's actually tying to perception, we filter all the stimuli that comes into us all the time, 24/7. I guess when you're sleeping, it's a little bit not as intense, right? But you have to filter that, and it becomes what do you call it? Selective perception. You become selective in what you look at. You only focus on I'm focusing on the screen right now, and stuff like that, or I'm focusing on a book and I'm reading it. I'm tuning out the air conditioner in the background. I'm tuning in your voice when you talk and my voice when I talk right now in
mhm.
this moment, because that's selective perception. Now, for someone with autism, it might not be like that. It might be through theory that they're talking about. The air conditioner's blaring, but their voices are blaring too. Like, imagine being in a classroom full of people talking. Right? Everyone's voice is just as loud as everyone else's voice. It's all hitting you at once, and everything is hitting you at once. The senses of the table that your hands are on, your feet on the floor, the clothing on your body, all the sights around you, all hitting you at one time. They can't. The theory is like they can't selectively choose what to focus on one at a time, so it becomes overwhelming. And so there's a tendency for them to shut down and kind of, and maybe that's why they kind of avoid eye contact. Maybe that's why it's difficult to communicate with people with that, struggling with that, because imagine everything blaring at once and you're trying to talk to, and they can't
Mm,
hear your voice because all the other voices are just as loud.
yeah. That's interesting because that could lead to a different type of conscious development, right? Their spectrum of reality can be so different than somebody else, right? And
Yeah,
so to the point where you can say like, well, like if they're a human being, right? Then what's normal? And then so I think like that question itself, like, you know, it's kind of hard to answer because in itself there is no normal then, right? Like so
yeah, that's
we all are we talking about then that our different limitations within our senses or lack of thereof limitations can cause our consciousness to develop in different ways.
yeah, yeah, I think so, because like some people who are born blind, they don't know the world any other way except for not having vision. So it's interesting. I wonder, because I dabbled into a little bit of it with the near death experiences, people being born blind and then being able to have those. But then there's like interesting, because I read a book somewhere where it's like someone who's born blind was still having dreams, and you wouldn't think someone who's blind can have dreams, but apparently it's possible. And I think they see different things. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was like
Mm.
strange colors or shapes. But you think about someone born blind, they've never perceived colors before. So what is that? It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's more of a subjective, you know, answer for them.
Yeah,
That's pretty interesting, like never knowing how you look and stuff. And and with that, it goes to, I it leads me to this question that, if they can't see themselves, then do they still care about their self-image? Do they still
no,
uh
unless someone
get
tells them.
affected by the social culture of wanting to look good for a potential mate, or something like that, or
That's interesting.
how does self-expression come along, right? Is that based on parents or friends who are taking care of them?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I mean, because they don't, they're not perceiving, I guess, the societal rules about attraction, maybe because they can't really see, because attraction is a hugely visual thing. So that's interesting. I wonder. It makes you wonder how that works with things like sexual selection and how all of that comes into play with attraction and relationships and then how, like you said, how they want to be perceived as attractive, but if they can't see themselves, then how can they know unless someone's
Then maybe how they feel an attraction or have an attraction is more due to the other person's voice or the other person's actions. They
other more important.
rely more on what they're able to perceive, right? And they appreciate, the person could be, pretty or not, but they appreciate more the fact that they're able to talk to them, or they're being heard by someone, or they're being touched by someone in a way that is, you know, um healthy or happy, and stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
Without,
yeah, I'm sure all that.
yeah,
Oh, I
for
mean, yeah.
lack of better words.
Well, I think all of this comes down to the huge philosophical question overwhelming this whole conversation is if our perceptions are biased, if we're limited to five senses, and even those five senses, even that each individual one is limited compared to other animals on the planet, and insects even, which are so small compared to us, yet they still can perceive more than we can in some ways, and we can perceive more than they can in other ways. So, what does that mean about reality? Because we depend on our five senses to perceive reality. So, if our five senses are limited, the philosophical question is: does that mean our perceptions of reality are biased? And because perception affects everything, but it's crazy is that perception is somewhat tied to judgment and to beliefs and social psychology. What that says is like our beliefs can affect the way we perceive reality, the way we perceive a conversation, even the way we perceive what we see in the room can be biased, selective perception. They did an experiment where there was a group in a restaurant, just briefly fast forwarding through it. And you probably heard of this one where a gorilla walks in the background and no one notices because they weren't told to.
Yeah,
So we know for a fact that our perception is limited. Does that mean reality to us is not the true representation of reality? You know, that's been
that's true.
debated. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting just how, like you said, that there is that selective um perspective, or how did you phrase it?
Yeah,
Selective
perception, yeah.
perspect perception. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I mean, this maybe has to do with how we were raised, right?
that's
Like
what
how we grew up is where we are drawn to look at certain things. But I think about this too, right? Because I was looking through YouTube, and I saw this video that caught my attention. It was 10 questions you need to ask about to yourself to know more about who you are, right? And so it's basically like an interactive video, or not interactive in the sense that you're providing feedback, but more interactive in the sense that you get to ask yourself those questions, and then it provides some answers after to understand a little bit more about yourself. And so, for example, one of them was where they had a black image, and this might be like a little bit geared towards psychology, but they had a black image of what looked like an alligator, but in the mouth it had a little boat, right? But I first noticed the big, what's it called, the big alligator, right? And then I noticed the little boat afterwards. And so it went on to say that when you notice the big alligator first, you have a way of seeing the world in a big picture. And then if you saw the boat first, you have a way of seeing detail, and you're very detail oriented,
that makes sense.
which goes to show that maybe our how we perceive the world also has to do with our own personality and our own I guess, you know inclinations because everybody has also different perspectives. Like some people are introverted, some people are extroverted, some people tend to be more creative than others, some people are more open-minded than others. And so with all of these things intertwining, yes, part of it is all how you grew up, but also part of it is your own DNA, your own personality that you developed, and sometimes that it's genetically passed down from parents to child, right?
Right.
um or I don't know how, I don't want to say anything outside that is not, you know scientific, but it seems like it, right? Or is there something that our parents can pass down, or is that, or personality is definitely not in the ballpark?
That's a good question, actually. I mean, to my knowledge, I'm not 100% sure. What I do know is it used to be back in the history of psychology and science, biology and genetics. It was only genetics, I think. It was at one point it was like only genetics passes down certain things, and then now it's moved now towards it's not just genetics, it's also nurture, which is another word for a metaphor or however you want to call it for environmental influences. And the environment around us can influence our genetics and it can turn on and off
Mm,
genes. So now it's nature versus nurture,
yeah.
but now it's not just nature versus nurture, it's like nature and nurture together, working together to create, attributes that we have. But yeah, I mean, yeah,
Yeah, because that's interesting. Because one of the things I realized that, you know, with the Myers-Briggs test, I think you might be a little bit familiar with that, right?
personality.
Well, I'm an ENFP, right? And with that, my dad tends to be extroverted too, and I have a closer inclination towards him, right? And my mom is an introvert, and my brother's an introvert, and they have a closer relationship themselves. But it's something that we didn't just say like, oh, this is how it's gonna be, right? We naturally gravitated towards a certain person as children, and happened to acquire certain personality traits from them. Um, where in this case, just using the extroverted introverted component, um, I got some things more from my dad in terms of personality. That's not to say that I did get some from my mom too, but I'm trying to see if it's like you said, something where it's triggered, you know, um, or
Yeah.
it just kind of like happens. It's just you're just kind of born with it.
Yeah, yeah. So my final thoughts would be like, that could definitely be the case because I think it's extremely complicated. So maybe it's not 100% the case of it's passed down from your parent genetically completely, but maybe it's a mixture of the environment, like what you were kind of trying to explore is maybe the environment can trigger it if it's kind of just there from the parent. And that's basically what the modern nature and nurture argument and theory, postulates is like it's there's environmental factors as we're growing up as a child when we're most sensitive to the environment and we're most developing and stuff like that. So maybe yeah, like especially when you get into attachment theory of psychology, Bowlby's attachment theories, and about how those very early childhood experiences shape the way we become as an adult. And in terms of being introverted, extroverted, you could apply it to that and all sorts of things. So maybe it's a mixture of both.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I guess some of my final thoughts would be, you know, there is, to some degree, like limitations, or at least what we would call limitations, because um we don't know that there are limitations aside from seeing that other living organisms can perceive other things, right? If we didn't know that, then we would just call ourselves, normal, or I guess the standard,
Right.
right? But we realize that, there is things outside of our perception that sometimes pass our eye or our five senses, and that sometimes we don't perceive, such as detail or certain colors or certain shapes, right? And so I think that there that does lead us to form a certain biased opinion, but not to say that one can still be open-minded to the possibility of there being other realms of reality, but it still focuses our attention, like you said, selective perception, to see things in a certain way, um, which might lead to some stereotypes of how the world works. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think just looking at a video today about Elon Musk, you know, a lot of people told him that renewable energy or energy itself was costly, that you couldn't send reusable rockets to space, and he's breaking the boundaries of what is possible, which goes to show that if we have some limitations in the world, whether that be through our senses or through just worldly problems, that they can always be challenged, and they can always break through something new.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
yeah, well, thank you guys for watching today. If you really enjoyed this video, this podcast, please leave a like down below and also subscribe to our channel, because we are committed to continue bringing you amazing content, outside of the box ideas. If you also have some suggestions that you like for us to cover, please drop them down below in the comment section, and we'll consider them for an upcoming video. Until next time, we will talk to you soon.